creating polygons one by one is not the most efficient way of modeling, but it's something that we all have to do at some point during our modeling projects. And especially if you're working in organic modeling, then you're actually going to be creating polygons by hand continually. Generally, though, we'll be taking pre-created sets of polygons from a primitive, and then we'll be working with these, refining them and molding them into a form that's more used to us. And to do that, we have to go in and be able to modify the sub-objects that we've just been looking at. You know, we need to be able to move edges, move vertices, move faces, move elements around, so on and so forth. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail now. Let's create ourselves a mesh. Let's say a geosphere, base to pivot. Click in the viewport. I want to have quite a few vertices, edges, and faces here, so I'm just going to click on 8 segments just to make it a little bit more complex. Right click on the object, convert to editable mesh. Now we have an edit mesh that we can work with. I'm going to go into sub-object mode and I'm going to transform. Actually, before we carry on, let me just create another object here, teapot. There we are. Just make this one a little bit simpler. I right clicked on the spinner there just to zero the value out, which put it down to 1 segment. Go back here. I'm going to select the top vertices on here. It's actually not selected all the way through to the back. That's because I've got ignore back facing on. Let me just turn that off temporarily while we do this. Select that again. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to transform these vertices. So let's try moving them. We'll just use the gizmo, and you can see I'm just going to move them around. That makes perfect sense. We can just move them in whatever plane we want to. So as you can see, translating is pretty easy to understand. I can rotate them. And again, that makes perfect sense. And I can scale them just on one axis, so I can do them on all axes at the same time. So we can change the geometry in that way. And you can see at the moment what we're doing is we're using view transformation space, but we could also use local transformation space to do this, or we could use world screen. So as you can see, when we're in screen, we can then deform based on screen space. Let's just go like this. That'll actually skew it. So we can choose different types of coordinate systems. And let's also try picking a coordinate system. So I'm going to pick this teapot here. I'm going to do a rotation around the center of the coordinate system. And the coordinate system is going to be the teapot. So now let me do the rotation. Got angle snaps on there. Let's just turn that off. And as you can see, I'm doing a translation around that picked coordinate system, the center of it. And what else could we do here? We could do world, and we could do the central. We could rotate around the center of the geometric selection. And the point I'm just trying to get across here is that the selection that I've done is being manipulated in exactly the same way as we were actually doing objects. You've got all the same options up here. You've got the different coordinate spaces that you can work in. And you can see that we also have the same options here for choosing what the pivot is going to be, whether it's going to be the geometric center. Let's try selecting some faces. Actually, let me just undo a few things. There we are. So we're back to the original thing. Let's just select some faces. Doesn't have to be anything pretty. We can do the same translations with faces also. So yeah, you know, we've got exactly the same options in sub-object mode as we had when we were working with gross objects. So that's pretty cool. The other thing is I've come out of sub-object mode with some faces selected there, polygons. If I go back in, you can see that that selection is stored. And let's go into face mode, just select them there, come out, go back in again, still selected. Same thing with edges, just select some edges, come out, go back in, go to faces. So you can see that each type of selection is actually stored. So we'll just select the bottom vertices there. So that's pretty cool, eh? Each is stored separately. Another tool, and this is particularly cool, is the soft selection. I'm actually going to make the stack here a little bit smaller, just to give us a bit more space down here, just by grabbing that bar there and pulling it up. I'm going to turn on soft selection, just select this vertex here, and you can see we have this fall off. Goes from red and then it goes through the rainbow all the way through to blue. Where it's blue, there's zero effect. So now, if I do a translation, you can see it's actually like turning the sphere into a kind of like a ball of rubber, and actually I'm just stretching parts of it out here. Let me actually just tessellate it a little bit more. Just going to go in here, select all the faces. I did Control A to do that. And I'm just going to use this tessellate feature here to add more faces. That splits all the faces into more faces. Let's go into vertex mode and then select that vertex, pull it up. What you can see here is two things. The way it was pulled is based on this curve here, and the amount that was pulled was based on the fall off value here. So let me just undo that. If we increase the fall off value, we're going to deform more vertices because the fall off size increases. But it's still using this profile. But if we change this profile as well, let's change it so it's pinched a lot. Now it's going to have a very sharp fall off. So, you know, when we pull this up, you can see we get that kind of shape. Now pinch and bubble are the opposite of each other. If we do bubble, it's going to create a bowed selection. So now, as you can see, it's much rounder. It's a much rounder kind of selection. And we can actually do both together to get a really kind of weird shape here. Probably not the most useful, but still pretty interesting. And there's just one more thing that I need to show you with soft selection, which isn't necessarily obvious from the get-go. I just undo that, and what I'm going to do is going to go into element mode, select the element, hold on shift and drag it, and it says, do you want to clone it to a new object, or do you want to clone it to a new element within this object? I want to create a new element, so I'm just going to say OK. Doesn't actually seem to have done that for some reason. Let me just turn off soft selection. I think that may have freaked it out a bit. Yeah, it did. Clone it to element. There we go. So now we have got two copies of the same sphere. And let's see what happens when we do soft selection here. Turn on soft selection. Let's just get rid of pinch and the bubble. And I'm just going to select this vertex here. Now, I've only selected one vertex. It's this vertex here, let's say. But you can see that the soft selection actually goes across onto the other sphere, which is kind of weird. It's not really what we would expect. And that's because the soft selection is based on a spherical area. And that means that these vertices are inside the sphere, therefore they get selected. So the way you can avoid doing that is by using this edge distance system. And what that does is it traces the soft selection back to the original vertex based on these edges. And what that also does is it means that it can't actually skip across a void, because for the soft selection to actually happen, it has to trace its way along an edge. So in this case, it's only allowed to trace one edge, which gives us a pretty rubbishy kind of soft selection there. So what we need to do is just increase the number of edges that it's allowed to trace. And there we go. And now, as you can see, we have a soft selection which is just limited to one of the two elements in this particular model. That's actually a really useful feature when you're doing things like modeling one nostril, and you grab a vertex on the nostril, and then the center point, the middle part of the nose then becomes selected because it's inside the sphere. You want to just adjust the nostril, so what you do is you turn on edge distance, set the edge distance to a value that gives you what you want, limits it so that it doesn't actually creep all the way around and get the center part of the nose anyway. And then you can actually limit your soft selection just to the area that you want to work with. And remember, we can actually pass on these selections to modifiers. Let me think, what would be a good modifier to show with this object? Let's say a noise modifier. So let me just select these vertices here. I'm just going to increase the fall-off distance. I'm going to increase the edge value here as well. So now we've just got these vertices selected here. I'm just going to come out of this and go down here, and let's see where we've got the noise modifier. There it is there. actually what we can do is we can go back into subobject mode and then add the noise modifier while we're in subobject. And the noise modifier was actually passed on to it immediately. You can see it's created the gizmo based on the size of the soft selection. So let's have a look what we can do with the noise. Let's just change the size of the noise. This is basically the effect of it, how much it actually deforms your vertices in units. What you'll often find is there's actually quite a large fractal space. So what you need to do is change the scale. And now you can start to see the effect. So you've got these pretty cool waves here. Just need to change the size of the deformation. There we go, pretty cool. And if we wanted to, we can go back down here again, select some more vertices, and then we can pass those back up to the noise modifier. You can see the gizmo automatically adapts to the selection that's been passed up to it. And you can see that the noise deformation is only being applied to these areas of the mesh that have some kind of effect from the soft selection. If you want to, we can go back down, we can change the size of the fall off, so we can make it larger, just increase that. And then we can go back up, pass it back up to the noise, and so that's pretty cool. I won't really dwell too much more on that because we've already seen that feature earlier on in the DVD. But there's one last thing we'll do here with this particular kind of thing, which is, let me get rid of the noise modifier and let me get rid of this selection. And I'm going to show you a really cool modifier, which is really, really great for doing special effects more than anything. But it can also be used for modeling. And it's called volume select. So here it is here. I'll just choose volume select. As you can imagine by the name, it bases the selection of objects, vertices, or faces on a box or a sphere or a cylinder or any custom mesh that you want to pick. So in this case, we'll go for box. We're going to select vertices. We're going to replace any selection that is coming up from below in the stack. I'm going to go in and I'm going to get that gizmo and I'm going to scale it. Scale it down. Let's do a uniform scale. And you can see now that only the vertices inside the box are being selected. Really cool feature. And in a later version of Max, they also added the feature of being able to use a soft selection with it. We can turn on soft selections. We can turn those up and you can see there we are. And now when I move this around, you get this dynamic selection based on this volume, this box. You can change it to a sphere, scale it so it's actually more of a uniform shape. And we'll change the fall off of the soft selection so it's a little bit harder, a little bit more harsh. Pretty cool. Move that around. And as I said, you can also use custom meshes. So, you know, if we had a, let's say, cone, create a cone, would work fine. Click on these objects, change the object to mesh object on the modifier, get the cone, move it around. And you can see that you get a selection based on the cone now. Move that there. Move that down there. So you can see that where the cone intersects the sphere, you can see you get the vertices selected there. What I'll do is I'll actually use this option here, pin stack. And I can now select this other object and I've actually pinned the stack so it actually shows me that modifier all the time. And the only thing it doesn't do is it doesn't actually show you the effect of it at all times, which is a pity, which is kind of what I was after. But there you go. Anyway, you can see what I'm talking about. If I animate this is probably the easiest way to do this. If I get this, turn on auto key, animation, move the object, turn off auto key, make sure it animates. And as you can see, you get this animated selection. You can then take that selection, pass it up the stack to a noise, let's say, crank up the size of the noise somewhat. Just use 9, 9, 9. Actually come out as 90. Change the size of the noise so it's quite noticeable. Go into the modifier for volume select, change the fall off so it's a little bit larger. You can see now that as we animate this, you get this noise field move through the object. Very, very cool, eh?